Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the third episode of Let Me Have the Last Say. Let Me Have the Last Say is an educational podcast by myself which seeks to educate and provide context into current topics. It looks at an argument from different angles, seeking to flesh out the reasons behind the fervent voices made by the people within the community. The podcast does not intend to provide a definitive conclusion to the arguments. Those are left to the listener's discretion. Episode 3, Gender Pronouns, Sexuality and Mental Illness, the Modern Introduction. You may have observed, my astute listeners, that in the last few years, gender pronouns, sexuality and even mental illness are inserted into conversations as part of an introduction into a person's identity. Gone were the days where ASL, age, sex, location used to be how you greet people. In fact, I recalled seeing a tidal wave of people listing their preferred gender pronouns on their LinkedIn, so it is hardly a surprise that you see it dotted and penciled in on a VTuber's profile. Sexuality, and even more so mental illness, is lower in ranking to that of gender pronouns, but it is also visibly listed amongst the number of VTubers I've seen. Some make a point of having it listed in their tags or as a form of introduction when greeting new viewers. This can also be attributed to how they build their community up by gathering people who belong and providing that sense of belonging. So what do you make out of this insertion? And is this really necessary for this day and age? Frankly, as liberal as I am, I find myself trapped in the confines of traditional thinking when it comes to the adoption of such practices. I cannot foresee myself making use of all three, even if they are part of my identity. Perhaps this can be attributed to the number of years I've spent keeping it bottled up, or understand that reality isn't that kind to those different, especially if you're living in a conservative and religious country. People may say that the internet is free, so you can be yourself. It still doesn't calm the fear I have. So my answer to the question is that it is necessary on an educational level, but everything should be weighted with a pinch of salt. And that pinch of salt is what I would like to discuss right now within this podcast. So let me explain. I have nothing against gender pronouns. Growing up, I self-identified as a she/her, despite having feelings of being very much more like a he/him. I was a tomboy, and I would run around with my guy friends. I would climb trees. So I felt very much at home being more of a boy than I was a girl. In fact, if you ask me to count the number of friends I had, boys versus girls, even up until this day and age, I would say I had 9 boys as guy friends and maybe the odd 1 or 2 as girls in my circle of friends. So you can imagine that I'm very not attuned to anything that is remotely feminine or remotely of a female's interest, is what I would term it lightly. Indeed, all I was lacking was a different body part and a masculine voice. And I have often dreamed and asked why I was not given that by God. And that sounds odd, but that was me at a young age, feeling very alienated, feeling very disconnected with my surrounding. Now, many of my friends have come out and voiced their preferred pronouns since gender pronouns became a norm. The agonizing difficulty to remember and use the correct pronouns, though, that eats at me. And the reason why I say that eats at me is because I attribute it a lot more towards how drastic the change has been and how little contact I've had with these people. So it doesn't make it easy to remember. It's often easier to make such mistakes repeatedly using the wrong pronouns because it's not heavily enforced. And I'm not being surrounded by a group of people that are using it on a consistent basis. Root memory learning through practical practice is something that can only be enforced if you are in the correct surrounding and it's being used on a day-to-day basis, right? If it's something you hardly use, you're not going to remember. And I'm fairly sure a lot of you out there would see that same thing being practiced in, say, for example, a soft skill or a hard skill. Let's say if you have not played the violin in many, many years and you come back and you try it again, you're rusty. You're not going to get it right the first time around. And that's the same thing even with gender pronouns. It's not something that is going to be easy on a person who has to learn to make the change. And it's not going to be easy as well on the party who's expected to be listening or anticipating that change. You know, inclusivity can only be formed from acceptance. And acceptance is a two-way bar. Both sides have to be able to figure out where the compromise is. In this case and in this instance, for people who are expecting an immediate change overnight or a consistent change to happen, despite the fact that I'm not within that vicinity or that circle, that very act of me forgetting to remember, even if it's not intentional, that seems like a complete rejection of that person's identity. And I can see how that takeaway happens. I can see how that takeaway is happening even on online itself or offline. And it's very alarming, it's disheartening. And I cannot help but feel apologetic towards the fact that I unfortunately happen to be in that group of people due to very specific circumstances that I understand why I'm unable to do it. But that doesn't stop my concerns about gender pronouns. It strikes me odd though with how we're using it nowadays. Not because I don't believe a person cannot identify themselves as either he, him, she, her, they, them. Merely what is to stop people from coming up with more outlandish terms to call themselves. There's an anecdote I heard from a friend who proclaimed to roll their eyes when a student approached them, self-identified themselves as a horse, and then proudly declared their pronouns to be it. This with the full acceptance, with the idea that the teacher, my friend, would accept it and would stick to it. Now, this teacher friend of mine, very inclusive, 100% supports pronouns. However, this took the cake for them. And so I remembered them saying, and I quote, bemused by the student's attempt, and promptly advised the student, sure, you may identify yourself as an it. However, it just means I can treat you beneath a human since you're an animal. Her remarks certainly amused me, sarcastic as it was, and I'm sorry to say that I'm unable to portray the same identical sarcasm plus eye roll, which you should have seen in real life. That I thought was beautiful, and it made me laugh because I know that she meant well. It's just the delivery of it and the students' attempt that confused. Even I'm confused by why they would go to that extent. And believe me, of all the gender pronouns, I honestly am particularly fond of they, them, because it's very gender neutral and fits with anyone who's gender fluid. So, I can see someone identify themselves as he, him, she, her, they, them. That I'm okay with. But I find myself confused by anything beyond the big three. This, sie, per? I admit there's not a lot of articles that delve deep into their origins, otherwise I would have included them as reference for people to read. At this juncture, there's little to differentiate them beyond that they are in fact commonly used gender-neutral pronouns by the transgender community. But this is also why it's odd and difficult. I can't help but wonder if the increasing different pronouns is because people want to have a stake in proclaiming which suits a suitable type of gender, a specific type of gender actually. So if we want to educate people, we have to keep it simple. And we have to make sure that we are able to provide that origin, especially for people like myself who want to make sure I know how this should be used. Instead of someone telling me how they're using it, I need to understand why it's being used that way and how to use it with you. And so this doesn't really help anyone understand how to use or why they should be used, because when I look it up on the internet, I see nothing. I really am drawing a blank trying to find that information. So if you're transgender and listening to this, please do share a comment on the origin and the meaning so that I can enhance my knowledge, because at this point I'm drawing a blank here and this does not help me be more educated. This doesn't help me to be able to completely get into this phase of doing it as well, because I have questions that are not being answered. And I'm fairly sure there's a lot of people out there that's in a similar boat as I am. Now, sexuality though is a topic that I'm slowly coming into being, but even here I struggle unlike the rest of my other peers. A gentle reminder that again, I come from Malaysia. It's a very conservative country. LGBTQA+ doesn't have as much rights here unlike in the West. The support level that you would get, minimal. This also means publicly declaring your sexuality is a no-go. You can't go about waving your sexuality open. It could get you into serious trouble. And no one here likes seeking attention. Everyone keeps it hush-hush, though of course there are some exceptions and it bleeds into certain media on the internet, and that's okay. But in general, no one goes out openly voicing it. I'm ace. Aces are mercifully one of the more acceptable LGBTQA+ here. And I say this only because it doesn't infringe on any religious or religious rights. I think would be like the main thing when it comes to Malaysia, because we are Islamic pro-Islamic, sorry. So we are pro-Islamic, and that means that being gays, being lesbians, it's going to be difficult. Transsexuals, it's a bit. I think we have a lot more drag queens because we're very close to Thailand. But even then, sometimes even the term that we use for them isn't the best. Now, being ace doesn't stop the intrusive questions though. I've had friends ask me before, when I readily admit that I'm ace, that they don't think I found the right man for me, or potential suitors, proclaiming dismays over the lack of sex and potential baby making. My body is my temple though. A little respect would be nice, thank you. However, as you can see, those are examples of people within my circle. Better to hold my tongue or be late ways trying to fend these types of remarks constantly. And so given that, I cannot imagine myself also using an attack ace publicly on the internet, because first and foremost, what is the image I'm trying to portray to the community out there? And will anyone truly understand what that means? I'm not saying that it's not wrong for us to educate people. I am just proclaiming that I feel that the instant I try to start putting myself with the term ace out there, it limits the growth that I'm imagining it to be, because I don't think that should be part of my identity. When I'm trying to put myself on the internet, I would like to be known for whatever talents I have or for how entertaining I can be, not because of my sexuality, right? Now, the trouble of being ace though is that there's also no such thing as a simple term for ace. Ace is an umbrella, and that has even more types broken down inside it. For every potential LGBTQ, there's a term for it somewhere within the ace umbrella. And I remember that partly because that it's under that, I had, when I first did my research for this, I went to Avon, when I first had and discovered my own sexuality. Avon is the Asexuality Visibility and Education Network. It's one of the largest forums for aces. One of their particular forum threads had a list of the different types of aces, such as aromantic, dannies, whatever, you name it, it's all there. The list was so exhausting to look at that at some stage I decided not to properly label myself beyond the fact I'm simply an ace. And I struggled with that because I realized that is really the core and the heart of like when you're trying to put yourself out there is you need specific labels so that people understand how to handle you and how to treat you. But it's like labeling a food product in a supermarket, right? It's like if you like lemons, you go to the lemons. You go for vegetables in the lemon section. You know, if you are a canned tomato, you go to the canned tomato aisle, and that's where you're gonna find your canned tomatoes. So I find these labelings, right, and trying to label yourself really odd, especially with sexuality itself, because I am grateful that people are embracing that sexuality more on the internet. I just, again, like with gender pronouns, do not and cannot imagine the usage of it where it's actually being used and in the light that I feel would have been more accepting. I feel that at this point in time, especially for aces, it doesn't really matter for you to put it out there, right? I don't really feel comfortable with the fact that there are so many labels out there, and to try to quantify myself into a box is so difficult because there isn't one. There really isn't one size fits all, right? And I think that is very, very different from someone who maybe self-identifies himself as gay or lesbians out there, because it's very simple. You're gay, you're trans, and that's it. And I think that those communities are more marginalized. And I think that they have a lot more trouble trying to find people who are more accepting towards it. Although we are now in a day and age where LGBTQA is more welcomed due to a lot of the movements that has been going on in the last couple of years itself. So, you know, but there is still a stigma against these people. So I can understand the need to put the label there. But I don't know how badly that can affect you, because I'm not sure if that can actually help with growth. Is what I think about it when it comes to on the VTubing sphere itself. Because again, whatever we're talking about discussing is just more of what I'm seeing within the VTuber community, right? So putting your sexuality out there, it's great. Are you welcoming unnecessary attention? I'm not sure. I am very skeptical about it. It's, you know, it's almost similar to the professing like, can it come down to, say, parasocial relationship? I'm not sure. I feel like VTubers, we do at some point as entertainers have a parasocial relationship with our listeners, with our viewers. So even being able to put your sexuality out there, perhaps is a good gatekeeper of some sorts. Maybe not. So at this stage, even sexuality itself, I don't feel comfortable seeing it there. But here's the other thing that I've discovered outside of sexuality, because I think sexuality is very, again, I said it's very niche as well. It's because like I think gender pronouns are a little bit more widely acceptable, right? Sexuality, mental illness, especially these two, are very niche in the sense that it's not something very easily accepting and tackled by a lot of people. And it's also becoming sort of woke and in fashion right now, where you're seeing people coming out and saying, oh, I'm this, when they're really not. And I've seen examples and I've heard from a lot of people where someone comes out and proclaims something because they just want to fit in because everyone's doing it. That's something I'm very uncomfortable with. So sexuality is one. Mental illness especially is something that is quite common. I was recently diagnosed as autistic, and this is partly because I had difficulties at my workplace a while back, which affected just how I viewed everything, because I thought it was normal for me to struggle, and I knew I struggle a lot because there were certain things that just didn't line up, and I was getting a lot more questions where it was comparing me against my peers, and it was in a way where I felt like, hang on a second, like even though I'm feeling down about this, but now I'm starting to question, why can I not perform like my peers? Am I just really that dumb, or am I just an idiot? Why do I act or react in a situation in a certain manner, but people don't see that? One friend told me, potentially you have ADHD. Another friend told me, I just think that you're on the spectrum. I just don't know if you are, but you have traits that you're on the spectrum, because I've worked with people on the spectrum. And so when I had a really difficult, event happened to me, I said, okay, screw this. I've delayed this for so long, let's go and get myself checked. Am I mentally ill or am I normal? If I'm normal, okay, shit, I need to figure out how to work on this right now, because, people can reason things out. Why can I not? It eats at me. You don't want to confirm that you've got a problem, and you, at the same time, if you don't have a problem, it's all on you, right? It just bogs me a lot. And so I remember going in to a government clinic in government hospital, and I got myself assessed, and it took, I think, 2 months to even meet a psychiatrist. And even though they can't do like a full complete assessment because I'm an adult, but the conclusion that was told to me after I left was that aside from having high anxiety, so that is a mental illness, I was also on the autistic spectrum, because I had a lot of traits that were very autistic based upon the anecdotes and stories that I told. And that opened up a whole lot of can of worms in my head. I've mentioned this before on my streams for anyone who was listening in, but I'll mention it again for people who are new and listening to the podcast. In Malaysia itself, having a mental illness is not really going to be a good thing, because the way the society works here is that they have never been very kind to people with mental illness. If you had ADHD, or even if you're autistic, if it's impacted you for like 3 years straight, you could actually apply for what they call an OKU cards, orang kurang upaya, which is basically how we would term for people with disabilities, right? But like in this case, we were classified as mental disability. Mental learning disabilities is a very specific term. Okay, it's a learning disability that we have, but on a mental level. And once you get that classified, suddenly you don't have access to insurance. You just don't have access to certain things that would have been your rights. And because our government doesn't really take care, there's really no social or health care of any kind. Social welfare, that's the word, social welfare. You don't have social welfare with the government itself, not in a way that maybe the Western countries have it. So what ends up happening is that for a lot of people within the system itself, if you are handicapped, you couldn't go out to your boss and say, I want concessions done and made because I've got a handicap. No. In fact, a lot of companies will not hire you because you have a handicap. They would look at you and they say, no, you have to fit in with us, not we fit in with you. And that means that immediately it wasn't easy. It wasn't going to be easy for me to go out and find a job. It wasn't going to be easy for me to go out there and say, hey, I need a certain environment to work for me. I can't do that. I have to go out and act like a normal person out there, right? And I think similarly, that's how I also see it on the internet. Like, putting out my mental illness, yes, it's basically telling viewers, hey, be more understanding that I've got this issue going on, that I need certain things being done here, and I'm going to react in certain ways if you bring something up to me in a certain fashion, right? But it also alienates people, because not everyone have an understanding towards it. Not everyone is well aware or educated enough to be able to cope in that environment. And that's not something that I want to enforce into people, right? As much as I would love more understanding and more and a bit more forgiveness, at the end of the day, people are coming in because you're entertaining, you're funny, and that's who you are. Now, that said, noticeably, if you look at Western VTubers versus Japanese VTubers as an example, right? Japanese VTubers primarily consist more of entertainers, and we're talking about like people who are non-corpo, okay? Non-corpo VTubers. They are entertainers. They are musicians, singers, actors, you name it. Those are the groups of people that you're seeing. Very, very talented people. But in the West, it seems like everyone in the English-speaking side of the world, majority of the people who are VTubers have a sort of mental illness. And I can't help but wonder, like, if it's only because we cannot fit in with society that we look at VTubing as an outlet to be able to be out there. Because I kid you not, the amount of VTubers I've seen, and this includes corpo now, from the English-speaking side, proclaiming like, I am a NEET, or I've got depression, anxiety, I've got ADHD, I'm autistic, like all of that. You see that all over the internet. And it's baffling. It's baffling because I'm wondering if this is just an outlet, a type of outlet for them to be able to express themselves fully, right? Because in a day-to-day, you can't express yourself as how you want it to be. So you have to fit in with society, whereas on the internet, you can be whomever you want, and therefore you can be whatever you choose to be, including being as berserk as you want. So I find that unique and interesting, but it's also, again, why I don't feel comfortable with it, voicing it out too much or putting the label there and making it known about it, because again, like, is this how I want to be identified? I feel like a lot of VTubers out there, they're trying to put like the gender pronouns, sexuality, and a mental illness out there, is because that is what you're seeing right now. It's a huge movement in the West where everyone's sort of coming out and saying it and showing that they are where they belong, right? That it's being united in one specific type of voice and narrative. But here in the East, it's not like it's something you could easily do in most places. And so even for myself itself, again, being in Malaysia, being a Malaysian itself, I look at it and say, hang on, I really don't see the value in it. I don't see the value in it as much as I understand what it means to have that. But this is very private and personal. This is very PNC. Gender pronouns aside, I think sexuality and mental illness is a very private thing. I don't want to air it out like I'm airing soiled underwear. I'm sorry. Like, what does anyone need to know? No, they don't. I think that I don't want to be judged or given the so-called slight advantage because I've got that, because that doesn't make me feel any happier. But yes, I would like that consensus. No, it means that I now know that I either am getting something because I have these and therefore I'm being given a slightly more advantageous situation, or I know that it's backfiring against me because I've got this condition and I'm not working a way around the conditions that I have to take that step and that leap forward. So as a greeting itself, as an introduction, definitely on my camp, it feels very difficult. Like I said, I do think it's necessary. I just think that with all these considerations involved, it is not easy to sort of make a decision and say, like, would I like this or would I not like this? I do feel it is being taken out of hand. I do feel that nowadays, I find it really funny to see a lot of people proclaim that they have it. I remember, like, even when I was getting myself assessed, right, literally my psychiatrist at first did not believe me up until I was telling my stories, because they were like, oh, well, like, if you don't even believe anything, why didn't you just go online and just go on those tests and just do it? You'll get your answers. I'm like, wow, excuse me, I'm being for real here. But this kind of shows that today's youngsters have taken it one step too far in trying to proclaim their mental illnesses, that even now psychiatrists don't believe genuine people, because I think that you are just someone trying to ask for it and you're just trying to get a label so that you can go out proudly, waving it out. It feels bad, man. It feels bad being in that situation. So yeah, definitely no, but like, tell me what you guys think. I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions. Man, the good old days of ASL. Really missed that. We should bring that back. If people are going to go down the whole like gender pronouns, sexuality, and mental illness as an introduction, you might as well be an ASL person and come out and also say your age, your location. Why not, right? It's a new thing. All right, thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode of Let Me Have the Last Say. I'll be back with episode 4 soon, and I will see you guys in my next podcast. Until then, take care. Bye bye.